Hey, so the Stadium Series game in Columbus is tomorrow. Did you know that? Did you? Let's face it, the outdoor game as a concept has really lost its luster over the last couple of years. What once was must-watch TV and a marquee event celebrated by hockey fans everywhere has turned into just another game on the schedule. And that sucks, because if I'm honest, the concept itself is still really good, and unlike other gimmick games, it still feels natural and ingrained into the actual culture of the sport. And yet despite that, ratings are still down across the board, with the Winter Classic especially seeing a steady decline in viewership and even dropping below 1 million viewers for the first time this season. So how did we get here? How did we go from having one of the most beloved events on the calendar to this? And how do we fix it? Well, in my opinion, there are 3 problems that have plagued the outdoor game over the last couple of years. 2 are realistically pretty small, but are exacerbated by the 3rd problem that is pretty major and actually encapsulates a lot of issues with the games as a whole. So let's go over them, starting with problem 1, repetition. I'm going to keep this one brief because how many times over the last couple of years have we had an outdoor game featuring the Blackhawks, Flyers, Penguins, Bruins, Rangers, Red Wings, etc, etc, etc. How many times have you had your interest piqued by the announcement that the Heritage Classic is coming back, only to see that one of the Alberta teams is playing? The NHL always wants to push their most valuable teams and their biggest stars, so obviously it makes sense that they'd want to put them on a bigger stage. But I just can't bring myself to care, especially if I have to see them every year. Again, I'm going to keep this one brief because you already know it's an issue, but it might not have been that much of an issue if it wasn't for problem 2, lack of unique hosting sites. Choosing a site for an outdoor game seems to follow a pretty simple formula. Step 1, choose an NHL market. Step 2, find their biggest stadium. Step 3, build a rink. Step 4, profit. But for as simple as it may be, you can only go to so many baseball and football stadiums so many times before they all start to feel kinda samey. Don't get me wrong, as cool as it was to go to Wrigley and Fenway the first time, the second time around, not as much. See, there's that repetition problem again. You know, I'm even going to extend this issue to a lack of quality hosting sites. What do I mean by that? We'll take Montreal for example. They seem like a prime candidate to host an outdoor game, and the NHL probably knows this as they've had them participate in 4 games already. All as the road team, because where the hell would you even host it in Montreal? Olympic Stadium is severely outdated and won't even be open again until 2027 when they get their new fixed roof, thus taking away half the appeal these games would even have to begin with. There's Stade Saputo just across the street, but they're definitely not going there, with it being smaller than the Bell Center for God's sakes. And I guess you could go to Percival Memorial if you really want to sell those extra 3,000 tickets. So now, instead of trying to find a feasible new venue in a market that definitely deserves it, they'll just go and use whatever MLB ballpark they haven't shelled out the money for yet. What I'm really trying to say is that despite the formula being solid, that doesn't make it interesting. You can't just go to these cavernous facilities with sightlines not built for hockey and expect us to be intrigued by the novelty of it all, especially when these same facilities don't have a lot of novelty to begin with. But honestly, this still could have been overlooked if not for problem 3, oversaturation. Now this is the biggest one and probably the most obvious if you've been keeping up, but the NHL has insisted on holding multiple outdoor games per season. I mean, we had 4 just last year, at least 3 per year between 2015 and 18, and 6 in 2014. Now they seem to have stated out as there are only 2 games on the schedule for this year and next, but when you've had 2 games minimum on the schedule for over a decade, then you can't really expect the allure that drew people in to still be there, and for even the most hardcore fans to still be invested. Let's not forget that at the end of the day, these are still just normal regular season games. And regardless of the spectacle, it's always going to be hard to get fans invested unless their team is playing. Add on top of that the fact that you're expecting them to be invested multiple times a year, and that's just not going to happen. But the worst part about the oversaturation of these games is how it actually accentuates the other 2 problems. Because they oversaturated the product, they eventually ran out of unique hosting sites, leading to a lot of repetitive teams and venues, thus driving down the overall interest in future installments. It's become a vicious downward spiral that I don't see them getting out of anytime soon. So that begs the question, where do they go from here? What changes could they make to the format to bring back some of their lost interest? Well, if I could come up with 3 problems, then surely I could also brainstorm 3 solutions. So I did just that and came up with 3 ways I think the NHL could fix the outdoor games. Starting with option 1. Nothing. This is depressingly the most likely outcome, but then again, if they do go this route, I can't really blame them. Because even with all the negatives I just mentioned, these events still print money. Despite the ratings drop year over year, because of the status of these games, they're always going to see a jump in viewership. I'm sure a lot of owners love the idea of going from 18,000 ticket sales for a regular season game to possibly upwards of 40,000 at a markup for effectively the same product. And of course, these events still do numbers locally, with thousands of fans shelling out to see their team and instantly scooping up whatever specialty jersey they decide to put out. Hell, if you want a prime example of just how lucrative these games still are, even in their current form, just look at the money laundering scheme that was the 2023 Winter Classic, where the Boston Bruins got to play a home game at Fenway Park against the Pittsburgh Penguins, who, just to remind you, are owned by Fenway Sports Group. So Jeremy Jacobs gets an extra home date, more merchandise sales, and probably a decent chunk of ticket revenue, and FSG gets the hosting fee, concession revenue, and use of one of their most valuable assets at a non-peak time. At this point, it's a case of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And as much as I hate the idea, unfortunately, the simplest answer is usually the correct one. But that doesn't mean we can't still experiment with the formula. Which leads me to option 2. Just a little more Lake Tahoe. I want you to ask yourself, what's been the most memorable outdoor game over the last couple of years? While there have been a few good ones, I will admit, the one that probably stands out the most is Lake Tahoe. Due to quarantine orders being in effect during the pandemic, the NHL was forced to play behind closed doors without fans in attendance. They did make the most of this, however, as they took 4 teams out to Nevada to play a few games. With a beautiful location right on the waterfront, a picturesque mountain backdrop, it made for the perfect spot to hold a game. Ice issues and 8-hour delays aside, you also can't deny that it was a pretty successful event. So why not do it again? Why not try and branch out and go to other, more unique locations different from the stadiums we've gotten used to? I know here in Ottawa, there were plans to host a game on Parliament Hill at one point, and I've heard a lot of calls for the NHL to make use of the Rideau Canal in some capacity. I've also seen tweets calling for Lake Louise to get a game, and I know they want a few games in Quebec City, so why not on the St. Lawrence River with the Chateau Frontenac as your backdrop? Hell, if you want a really out there idea, the MLB is already playing a couple games at Bristol Motor Speedway later this year, so why not, and hear me out, take an NHL rink and put center ice on the Yard of Bricks at Indy. Come on, who's with me? Now, I'm not going to say they should do it every year. We don't want to oversaturate this again, but I don't think it would hurt to do it every once in a while. You've already found a proven adaptation of the concept, so just look into trying it again. With that out of the way, that leaves us with option 3. One special day. I tweeted this idea out a while ago, and if you didn't see it, I don't blame you, but to explain my thoughts here, the outdoor game has always been, and should always be, a spectacle. So make it one. I likened it to the NBA on Christmas. In their case, they have all their marquee matchups, rivalry games, and sometimes even a finals rematch on the schedule. So I think the NHL could benefit from doing something similar with the outdoor games. You already practically own the January 1st time slot amongst the major sports, so why not use it? Start at noon, end at 10, and have everyone at home with the family tuning in to watch the games. Think of the narratives you could push, like Crosby and Ovechkin having one last meaningful head-to-head, having some of your more stagnant rivalries like Ottawa and Toronto, Philadelphia and New York, or Vegas and San Jose, and giving them a bigger stage to compete on. Hell, could you imagine how cool it would be if the Panthers, who dominated on home ice in the playoffs last year, had to play the Oilers at Commonwealth in January? That'd be insane. But what I like the most about this idea is how it kinda lets the NHL have its cake and eat it too. You can still have 4 to 5 games a year, but fans will be less likely to notice or care if you repeat a team or a venue, as there will be more than one game to watch throughout the day. And they'll be more likely to be invested with the product, as they'll only have to focus on the one day, rather than having their attention stretched out over the course of the year. The main pushback I saw on this was how the NHL wouldn't want to go up against football. Now I get that if New Year's falls on a Sunday, they might be hesitant to go up against the NFL, but considering the only other competition on that day is normally the NCAA and some of their bowl games, and I actually don't think that can be used as a legitimate excuse. Especially now after the Four Nations face-off where they went directly up against the NBA All-Star Game and won. At some point the NHL has to realize that this game is growing, and while they might not do a Four Nations style tournament again, they already have something special here. Now they have to make sure they use it. And there you have it. A quick summary of how the outdoor game has seemingly fallen off over the last couple of years, but also how it could be improved. I don't normally do this, but let me know in the comments what you think. I'm curious as to what your opinions on my ideas are, and if you have your own, feel free to let me know as well. Now, while I know my ideas are a bit of a pipe dream and that the outdoor game will most likely remain unchanged, I think we can all agree that these events, while good, could still be just that little bit better. You have the largest skating rink in the world right there, guys. Come on, just do something with it.